Greetings, everyone. Yeah, last session of the day, so thank you for hanging in there. And I'm looking forward to presenting here. Let me just share my screen. All right. Okay, so this session is called DevOps for Java Shops. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And you can find me on Twitter at bbenz. Today, what I'm going to show you is, one thing I want to mention, if you want to follow along all the documentation for the demos I'm going to show today, it's mostly demos in my presentation. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction with some slides, and then we're going to go straight into the demos, which is going to be most of the session. If you want to follow along, aka.ms/DevOps for Java Shops is the way to go. And there's a QR code there as well that'll take you there on top of that. Okay, so we're going to cover 4 things today, which is what is DevOps? I'm going to make sure everyone's on the same page with a little introduction to DevOps. Most people have understand it now, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And I'll refer back to it during my during the demo as well. And I'm going to show you specifically today DevOps with GitHub. So we're going to show GitHub. We're going to show something called code spaces and GitHub actions. And if you don't know what any of those things are, you will by the end of the presentation. That's going to be the DevOps for action, DevOps in action part. And then I'm going to show you how you can keep your investments as well. Okay, so let's dive in with what is DevOps. This is a great quote by a colleague of mine, Donovan Brown. DevOps is a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value. The people, process, and products are the key to this. Each one of those things cannot operate without the other, and each one needs to be addressed separately when you're developing a DevOps process or an organization that's going to be using DevOps. And value, I've highlighted value as well because there's a lot of work that needs to go into building your DevOps environment. It definitely pays off in the end. But if you're not delivering value with that DevOps environment, then you really need to rethink your processes. So let's talk about people, process, and products. Here's some of the things that people will say on any software project, any software organization. Works on my machine, who's supporting what, where's my code, can I get an update, and how is the timeline? So these things have different meanings depending on the context. So works on my machine, everyone's familiar with that, you know, it's working on my laptop. I don't know why it's not working on the server. Who's supporting what? Meaning, you know, who actually delivers this part of the code, or who's supporting the organization in delivering new features and answering questions. Where is my code? And that can mean where's my code physically on servers, and it can also mean where's my new feature or something like that that needs to be updated in your applications. Can I get an update? Meaning, can I get an update of the software, or can I get an update of the project as well? So, you know, there's the point here is that there's always 2 different aspects to everything. There's the code part of it, and there's the people part of it. And that's the one that you have to focus on is, you know, can I get an update? Is there an update? When will our new feature be released? And how is the timeline? Everyone wants to know, how's the timeline? How are things going to be delivered? Are they going to be delivered on time? The thing I promised in my board meeting, is it actually going to be delivered on the day we said it would? Things like that. So how do you actually support the people? You do that with a good process. So this is a typical software development lifecycle where you plan, develop a test, release, and then monitor and learn. The planning, of course, you need to be able to support whoever's making the plan. They have to be able to delegate and communicate very clearly with the developers who make the actual features happen, and then test them. The release has to go smoothly, and at the end, you have to make sure that whatever was planned in part 1 is actually being delivered in part 4. And that's where monitoring and learning comes in. So did we deliver the feature that we were asked to deliver? And this is not always as easy as it seems. Quite often there might be compromises or something misunderstood by someone along the process, and the actual feature that's being implemented does not exactly match what was planned at the beginning. So monitoring and learning is key. I find that's overlooked a lot. And we'll cover that in a little bit as we go along. Products is where you support the people and the processes. So in this case, I work for Microsoft. We're going to talk about Azure products, but there are some other products of the cloud vendors as well. For development, we have GitHub, Visual Studio, and Visual Studio Code. And for delivery, we have Azure Pipelines, Extensions, and Actions. And today I'm going to focus on GitHub Actions, but I'll talk a little bit about the others as well in a bit. And managing and securing. So we have Azure Monitor, which allows you to monitor things. As a developer advocate, I quite often build really simple demos, or I build demos that have been rendered insecure in some way to show how you shouldn't do things. So I get in trouble with Azure Monitor all the time. People are, I always get notifications in Azure about things that I'm doing wrong. So it works. I know that for sure because I fall foul of it quite often. Azure Policy, Azure Automation are two ways to make sure that you're actually building things and delivering things in a way that was expected and a way that's secure. And Azure Security Center, we literally spend billions of dollars a year on security. When I started at Microsoft 10 years ago, I speak to a lot of companies who would say, we can't put our stuff on the cloud because of security. And now they're saying we have to put our stuff on the cloud because of security. The threats out there have just grown exponentially, and it's really hard for a regular IT shop with a limited budget to keep up with latest threats. And that's where Azure Security in the cloud comes in. We're actually able to keep ahead of those threats most of the time and make sure that we're delivering something that's secure and that's going to keep your data and your customers safe. All right, so deliver with Azure, what do we actually have? I'm going to focus today on GitHub. We have GitHub Actions and Extensions. So GitHub Actions, a lot of folks are familiar with. It's basically scripts that you write that run on what we call runners at GitHub, and the runners actually process the software. And there's a lot of software built into those runners that you can use for testing and deployments and building. And I'll show you some of that today, but you can also add software if something specific is not in there. GitHub Extensions are slightly different. So GitHub Extensions are they are software that has been written by a third party. Azure has quite a bit, other cloud providers as well. And that's not scripting, and it's not open source in most cases. It's something that's been added in to make integration easy. So that's the difference between Actions and Extensions. With Actions, you can do integration as well, but Extensions are something that's solely provided by a third party specifically for doing integrations and adding value to GitHub repos. It might be an internal tool or an external tool. And of course, we have integration with clouds, IDEs, and one thing to mention, a lot of people might not have kept up. So we bought GitHub a few years ago, and since then we've actually made more things free. There was a concern out in the marketplace that we were going to tighten up what was available for free, and that's actually not the case. We've made it opened up what is free. So private repos used to cost money, they don't anymore. And private repos for teams don't cost money up to a certain point as well. And then we have code spaces. So code spaces is something I'll just mention it really quickly. It's a way to actually have a fully implemented IDE in the cloud that you control. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit as well. We also have Azure Boards, which is Kanban boards for building your applications, Azure Pipelines, which is what folks used to refer to as Azure DevOps, and that's for building and releasing, and it's still really good for multi-cloud and multi-stage releases. Azure Pipeline is still the way to go there, although GitHub Actions is catching up. Azure Artifacts is a way to manage your artifacts in the case of the Java world, Maven and Gradle. Also, non-Java artifacts like Node and things like that. It allows you to store them in a third-party location and then pull them out and use them. It's very handy for audit and also for speed in some cases. And then we have Azure Test Plans, which allows you to do testing as well. All right, so GitHub is a big platform. If you want to check out something, let me show you. That slide is always out of date as soon as I show it. GitHub Octoverse. So GitHub Octoverse is a report if you ever need it. It's the state of the Octoverse. The latest one is still 2021. This is very cool in the sense that it tells you a little bit about what GitHub has done is they've taken all the repos that they're allowed to analyze, and they analyze them and tell you what's in them. And this is, by the way, something they use for a thing called Copilot as well. It's a similar idea. It's not the same thing, but for Copilot, it's a new feature that we have in GitHub that basically pulls code and allows you to post things. It's very cool. Anyway, so the cool thing about this is it gives you the latest information about GitHub and repos that are on GitHub. And let's see, so that's the location. Here's some of the language stuff. So Java looks like around 2018. Python seems to have taken it over. We'll see what the 2021 results are. But if you need any information about what's out there right now with code and things like that, maybe your bosses are asking you for, or your clients are asking you for, well, what's the latest and coolest stuff in GitHub? That's what you can use. You can use the GitHub Octoverse for that. All right. Let's go back to the slides. Just a moment. There we go. So I usually like to show that instead of that slide. And so GitHub, of course, has end-to-end. You have repos that you store code on, and then they integrate with GitHub Actions. And they can be, GitHub Actions can be used to deploy to clouds and other things as well. And there's a big CI/CD implementation using these things called runners. And I'll show a demo of that in a bit. I'm just sort of speeding through these so we can get to the demo. It has flexible CI/CD. It's integrated with GitHub, so you are already logged into your GitHub Actions if you've got them. If you need to connect with resources, you use tokens, what we call published profiles, or in some cases, what we call service principals in Azure and equivalent in other clouds as well. You can put those in your GitHub repo as a secret and then use those to authenticate and connect to your end target environments with GitHub Actions. There's community standards for code to cloud. So we have a lot of different GitHub Actions that have already been built. Any kind of crazy idea you have for building a GitHub action, check with the marketplace first. So marketplace.github.com is a great place to start. And there's a lot of GitHub Actions out there. Most of them are free and open source as well. And you can just grab them and start playing with them, edit them as you need. One thing that a lot of people don't know about is GitHub Mobile. So GitHub Mobile is a very cool tool. I use it all the time. When I'm looking at issues or want to just quickly post something, GitHub Mobile allows you to do most of what you can do on GitHub Actions. In fact, when you authenticate these days with GitHub, if you have third-party authentication set up, the GitHub Mobile, if you've enabled it, GitHub knows, and they will actually allow you to authenticate using the GitHub Mobile app, which is pretty cool as well. I might have a demo of that later because I can't remember if I logged in and checked my GitHub, and I do have to log into GitHub for this demo. So code spaces. Code spaces I mentioned before. So it's a way to actually open a Visual Studio Code-based editor in a cloud, and you can pre-configure those editors so that they have an environment that you specify to work with the code that you actually use. You start at the GitHub repo, you actually clone it into a separate runner, the same thing we use for running GitHub Actions, and then that runner is inside a container, actually processes your code, and you push back to your repo just like you would anything else, just to keep proper processes. All right, so let's get to the demo. Hopefully everyone's on the same page for that. So what I'm going to do today, let's start with the actual demo itself. So here's the website we're going to use. It's a really simple Spring Boot application. And I've got something called feature flags implemented here. Feature flags are handy for doing A/B testing and things. And I can literally turn on and off features without having to do a deployment to my application. So if I go in here to my GitHub features, I go into Feature Manager, GitHub features, sorry, Azure features. I click on beta. So I've enabled this feature now. So if we go back to the application itself and we refresh it, it is enabled. Okay, sometimes it takes a second. We refresh it. Oh, this isn't working. This is fun. Come on. Oh no, it's not working. Anyway, normally it takes a second sometimes to refresh, but you should see a new see a new feature here. And in this case, the feature is bit. So I'm going to come back to this because sometimes it takes a second to refresh. I don't know why it didn't. Let me just refresh this actually. See if there's something wrong with Feature Manager this morning. Because normally you see a little message up here saying you updated your feature. And I'm not seeing it today. Anyway, that's not the main part of the demo, but I did want to show it. Let's see if notifications, we're not getting any notifications. Oh, that's good. All right, let me, I'm going to close this completely and I'm going to open it again. That's weird. Feature Manager. So normally you just, oh, I'm an idiot. I didn't click, they've moved this flag from here to there. There we go. Update feature flag. Okay. Never mind. Live demo, folks. You can tell it's live. There we go. So there's the new feature. So bit is the feature that we're using. You can turn it on and off clicking on that feature manager. So let's just turn it off for now. And sometimes it takes a second to remove that. So there we go. All right. So that's feature manager. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to, this site, we're going to take it from GitHub. We're going to build it. We're going to build an action and we're going to build a, we're going to actually edit the code in code spaces and deploy it. And I'll show you how to do that. The reason I like this demo is because it's not just a simple hello world standalone demo. There's a dependency. So the dependency is on the feature manager. And if you don't include the dependency when you do the build and deployment, it crashes. So I'm going to show you how to do that in GitHub Actions. All right, so let's start there. When I'm looking at the application itself, this is what's called a resource group. So this little square here, or it says resources, it's DevOps for Java shops. This is my resource group. So the resource group is a way to organize your code in Azure, and there's other similar ways to do that in other clouds. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new web app that this is going to run on. Okay, so we're going to create a web app. All right, the resource group, we're going to use the DevOps for Java Shops resource group, and we're going to name this one JCON 2022. There we go. Has to be unique because it's going to have a website, .azurewebsites.net. You can use a custom website if you want. And then the runtime stack we're going to use here, you can use .NET, Java, Node, Python, Ruby. We're going to show Java 11. And you can also have Red Hat, JBoss, Apache Tomcat. We're going to just use the Java SE for now. And we're going to use Linux as the operating system. And the region we're going to use is West US 2. And the reason why we're going to use that is because we already have what's called an app service plan set up there. That's this thing here. And it just tells me that I already have a pre-configured environment that I can deploy apps to. Next, we're going to do deployment. And this is where the CI/CD part comes in. We're going to enable continuous deployment. And this is the part I mentioned where I have to log into GitHub. Let's see if I have to today. Benz is my organization. So this is details about GitHub. And what it's asking me, I'm building something on Azure, and it's asking me, okay, where's your code? Where do you actually want to grab your code from? In this case, we want to look for DevOps Java Shops test feature flags. And we're going to use the main branch. So what's going to happen here is it's actually going to create a GitHub action for us. And we're going to be able to use this GitHub action with one small modification to bring in our feature flag. It doesn't know about the feature flag, so we have to fix that. But next, I can do networking. We're just going to leave networking defaults the way they are. You have tags, which you can use to organize your applications further. And you can enable application insights, which is Azure Monitor. That's the thing I mentioned earlier about monitoring and making sure that you learn from your applications. But this is a demo, so we're just going to finish that up with a review and create. And we're going to create it. Now, a couple of things are going to happen. It's actually going to deploy this application out to the cloud, but it's going to do that by going to the GitHub repo and creating a GitHub action, and that GitHub action is going to deploy. So the two things happening, the resource is being created on Azure, and then GitHub Actions is being used. And it's going to tell us that the deployment was successful, which is technically true, but it's not entirely true because it won't work yet. We do have to fix that GitHub action to point to the feature flags. So just give this a second. Deployment is in progress. Okay, so deployment, it's got my resource there. The website is going to tell me in a second it's ready to go. There we go. Deployment is complete. So, okay, so it's technically true. It's complete, but it doesn't actually work yet. So if we go here and we look at the resource itself, which is an Azure web app, takes a second for the link to pop up over here on the right, usually. It's taking more than a second. All right, anyway, let's go to the GitHub action, then I'll show you that after. So if I go into the repo here and I look at actions, it's actually already created an action. So this is the same repo I used. And as you can see, here's a little red X. That means that the actual deployment that I just did for JCON 2022 failed. And it failed because Maven is looking for that feature flag link, and it can't build properly until you have a feature flag link. So what do we do about that? All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to just exit out of here. I've got to just make this smaller so I can actually get to it. There we go. So what we want to do now is we want to update this. You go into your code and you go into GitHub workflows. This is where GitHub actions are located in your repo. They're automatically generated in this case, and it's called main JCON 2022. So inside of here, there should be a reference to that feature flag. So how we actually do that is by going to workflows. I've got this one that I saved up here. This one's disabled, but it's got the reference to the feature flag. And it's actually referencing an environment variable. And I'll show you how to set up environment variables in a second, but let's get this going first. All right. So if we go into JCON 2022, I can edit this here. I can edit it right here. But I don't want to do that, right? That's not very good software development process. In this case, we talk about people, process, and products. There's another way to do it, though. So if we go back into the main part of the repo, I can actually go to code. Now, everybody, not everybody, but most people are familiar with this part where you can clone a repo to your local machine. You can also set up code spaces. So code spaces is what I was talking about before. And I can create a code space right here. And this is going to take a clone. It creates a container, and it runs on these things called GitHub hosted runners. It's going to clone my repo into that container, and it's going to fire up a version of Visual Studio Code, which runs inside that code space. And when it does that, I can actually edit this, and I push back. So this actually created a clone. I'm still in my browser, as you can see here, but I have that little tiny icon there. And this is something I'll refer to in a minute. This extension pack for Java is what I use for Java. This is a Java application. Microsoft recommends installing it. I could actually install this, and then I could save it as something called a dev container, which gives you a pre-configured environment. So anytime anyone else fires up this repo, in code spaces, it will use that dev container, which already has some things pre-installed. That's a great way to manage your environments that you're working with and manage security and minimal viable environments for your application. In this case, all we want to do is go into GitHub JCON 2022, and we want to paste that, hopefully it's there, yep. Paste that application there, or paste that reference to the environment variable, which is going to update the application and allow us to do this in a good way now. So if we save this, Control S, over here in the GitHub or the Git source control section, it tells me there's one thing that's been updated, and update feature flag for JCON. So I'm updating the feature flag for JCON, and I commit this, and it tells me there's nothing staged. I don't want to stage, so it's automatically going to stage it for me. That's nice. And then I can sync the changes. And when I sync the changes, it's going to do a push and a pull. I'm just lazy. I could just do a push, but I like to do a push and pull just to see if there's anything. And do I want to run git fetch? Let's ask me later. Okay, so now if I go back into the repo, which is this one, there should be, yep, there we go. So that's a new, anytime I push to this repo, it's going to create a new one. So let's actually go in and see what this code does. And while that's running. All right, so GitHub workflows, JCON. This is what the code actually does. It builds and deploys an app. So it builds a jar using Maven, and then it deploys it using a GitHub action out to the app service that you saw there. It uses this environment variable, and I'll explain where those are in a second. That's secure. So inside of this GitHub repo, there's some secrets that are only available to me. You can clone this repo, and you have to create your own secrets to make this work. And then anytime there's a push, so that's why that repo, that's why that action was triggered. Anytime there's a push on the main branch, it's going to run a build. It's going to use the latest Ubuntu. It's going to check out the code. So just like anything else, it doesn't use the code that's on that repo. It checks it out into a clone, just in case there's updates while it's running. And then it does a Maven clean install into the application environment itself, and it builds the application. Then we deploy. We use the same thing. We use another runner called Ubuntu latest. Well, it's using Ubuntu latest. And it's going to deploy out to a published profile. Actually, I should make this a little bigger. Sorry about that. And if you look at the published profile here, this is a token. So where are these things? I mentioned before. So if we go to test into the actual main repo here, and I go into settings, only I see these. Like I said, when you create a clone of this repo, you won't see these, but I can see them. And you can create your own if you're going to be there. So the app configuration connection string, that's the one that connects to the feature flag. And then there's a published profile. This one was updated. That's the first one I was showing you. But this is the one that was just created a couple of minutes ago. And this is the name. Inside of there, there's a token. And that token allows you to securely connect with your app service. Obviously, you don't want applications from anywhere deploying to your service, and you don't want it just gives the authentication. Everyone gets that idea between GitHub repo and the actual app service itself. So that's where we're at there. So this should have, yeah, it actually deployed, but it's still not going to work. So if we look at the build and deploy, it's actually deployed out. But it's still not going to function because there's still something missing in our application. So if we click here, it's going to give me a little bit of an error message because it's trying to start, but it can't start because it has no connection to that feature manager. Hello. Boy, it's slow today. I don't know why. I actually, for you folks, the default page is set up as welcome. As you can see, it doesn't work yet. So let's go in and let's troubleshoot that and figure out why it doesn't work. This is intentional, don't worry. So if we go back into our repo here, into our Azure portal, and we look at JCON 2022, that's the app service that we just created. We have to go into configuration. just like we had to refer to the feature flag for the GitHub action to work, we also have to refer to the feature flag here. And it's really slow today. I don't know why. So let me just add that. So it's inside of application settings, new application setting. And we want to add a string called app configuration connection string. Let's put a value in there. Don't look. And we say, OK. We save this, which I do sometimes forget to do. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to update the web app. And it's going to rebuild. It's actually going to restart, not rebuild, but restart that application. So when it restarts, on the back end, that should be nice and quick. Yes. Okay. On the back end, everything's going quick. I think it's my connection between something with the portal that's not going too quickly today. So anyway, here's the same thing. That's the JCON 22 Azure websites.net. That's working. And when I start it up here, I go back into my feature flags, and this time I'll click on the right box. And when I go in there, this is the one. Takes a second. There we go. So the new feature is there. So the idea here is you can do A/B testing and you can do blue-green deployments using feature flags. And let me explain what that is. So A/B testing is where you have one version of the application and another version of the application, and the user, depending on when they log in and certain criteria, sees different versions of the application. Then you can use Azure Monitor that I mentioned before to watch their behavior and see if the actual new feature that's in the new version of the application is having the desired effect, whatever you wanted them to do with it. That's what A/B testing is. So you can make half the people go. And the way you do that in feature flags is you can create a new feature flag, and you can call this one JCON 22. And then you can go into the feature filter. You can do targeting, which is targets a certain region or location, depending on where the source is coming from for the user. You can do a time window, just post this particular feature on weekends, or you can do a custom. The custom can be a percentage. So the percentage itself, you can set up here. So 50% of the people see the old version, 50% see the new version of the application. This is also handy for blue-green deployments because you can set it up as 50%. So the difference between A/B testing and blue-green deployments, I should mention. A/B testing is half the people see, or a certain percentage of the people see the new feature, and a certain percentage of people see the old feature. Blue-green deployments is you deploy the application out gradually rather than shutting down the server, deploying the servers and deploying source code and then bringing it back up and everyone sees the new feature. You can deploy it gradually. So the way you would do that here is the same idea with A/B testing. You can set it up at 20%. So 20% of the people see the new feature, and then 30, 40, 50. And there's other ways to do blue-green deployments with Azure App Service as well as a lot of other features. We have Kubernetes and other things as well. You upgrade one container at a time. But in this case, what you can do is just continuously increase that percentage until it's at 100% and everyone has access to the feature. And then you can go in and change the code and do a new deployment with the new feature as part of the core code. But it's just a kind of safe way allowing you to roll back. So if you get to 60%, you find something wrong with the application, you can put it back down to 0%, and the application, the new feature, will be gone, and folks can continue on using whatever application or software or site you're working with, and then you can re-implement and redeploy later, depending on what you need to do. So that's the idea behind feature flags. I should also mention, I've been mentioning GitHub action runners. Let's show you what those are. I did want to show that. So GitHub hosted runners run on these things called hosted agents. So GitHub hosted runners is basically a bunch of VMs running a bunch of containers. And inside those, they have these hosted agents. You have Windows Server, a couple of versions of Ubuntu, and we have Mac OS as well. If I go into the one that I just used for Ubuntu, this gives you all the software that we have out there. And these are open source configurations, by the way. So all of this software is pre-installed on those GitHub hosted runners. As you can see, it's quite extensive. And if there's something in this list that you need, that's not in this list that you need, you can actually add that at the time of creating the container as well. So you get the idea. There's a lot of stuff in there. Okay, so that's about it. So that's what I wanted to show you in terms of the demo. Let me just check. I just want to check the questions quick to see what we're doing. Yeah, thanks. Jason, thank you very much for telling me there's a checkbox halfway over. It looks like they moved that. It used to just be on the left, but they moved it recently. So part of the fun of being in the cloud and doing live demos. So yeah, okay. If anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat. I can answer them there. And the one other thing I did want to mention as well, and then we can go into, so there's a couple other features here inside of App Service too. So if you go back to our dashboard and I show you the JCON 2022 App Service, there's something called deployment slots as well. So deployment slots are a way to create a new version of the application. So you can do A/B testing this way too. But this is more controlled at the end target environment versus being part of the feature flag. So this has more to do with deployments than it does for anything else. So meaning that I can create a new slot here. Right now, everything's going 100% to this website, but I can say JCON 2022 new version, and I could actually deploy to this deployment slot and leave the old deployment slot running with the original version of the software. And this one could have a new version of the software. Now, in this case, it wouldn't be a feature flag. It would be a new code base with the new version of the software. And then what you can do once this gets set up, close, you can set this up so 50% of the traffic goes to JCON 2022 new version and JCON 2022 the old version. In this case, I won't do that because I haven't deployed anything to the new version yet, but I'll just leave it like that for now. So you get the idea behind deployment slots. They're just a way of creating a new version of the application, and behind the scenes, Azure will route it depending on how many deployment slots you set up and where you've asked it to flow the traffic based on these percentages. Okay, so that's DevOps in action. I just want to show you a little bit. I mentioned A/B testing and blue-green deployments and how you can do that with feature flags and deployment slots as well. If you're already invested in DevOps, that is not a problem. You can keep your investments. Don't worry about that. A lot of folks, especially in the Java world, are using Jenkins. You can still use Jenkins. If you go into the GitHub Marketplace, you can use the actions that are already built in for working with Jenkins. Most people do have a very extensive build and test in Jenkins. And then when they do deployments, it's not necessarily so secure or so advanced. In this case, what we allow you to do, this is the software development lifecycle that I showed you earlier. It's just formatted in a different way this time. And we have integrations with pretty much all the tools you see here. So I mentioned Jenkins. So Jenkins, you can do build and test, and then you can pass it over to Azure Artifacts or GitHub Actions to actually do the deployment. And the deployment can be multi-stage, multi-environment, and you can get really, really advanced with your deployment, more advanced than you usually can with tools that are related to the native Jenkins that you're using for deployments. For building tests, you can still keep that investment and then use Jenkins for that. If you want to build out things on your infrastructure, that's one thing I didn't show you. I showed you how to create an app service using the portal. You can also do that with the Azure CLI. You can do this with this thing called Bicep, which is a set of JSON files that allows you to create resources on Azure. Yeah, so that's about it. So I showed you a little bit about what is DevOps, DevOps with GitHub, DevOps in action, and showed you how to keep your investments as well. And don't forget that you can find more information about this at aka.ms/DevOps for Java shops. I also have a workshop there that I've created that's self-guided that you can use to do the same thing I showed you here, but with Azure DevOps/Azure pipelines as well. And that's all I had. I wanted to leave a little time for questions. I know this session is finishing in about 10 minutes. So we do have questions. If anyone wants to ask, I'm here. No?
Yes. Yeah, you have about 5 to 10 minutes left, so we can just wait if any questions occur. But
Yeah.
Still, thank you very much for this well-structured and very informative session.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm just thinking of whatever else I can show. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just meant to praise you. So well done. Thank you.
Keep it
because
coming.
it was our last session for today. And yeah, just thanks again. And we have a few minutes left if any questions occur.
Okay. All right. Well, great. I'll let me see what else I can show you. State of the Octaverse, I showed you there. Boy, hosted runners, talked about that a little bit. Oh, GitHub Actions Marketplace. Let's look at that while we got some time. Thanks, Stefan. I see big thanks there. Like I say, if anyone has any questions, I'm here. Anything about Azure DevOps, Azure pipelines, Azure DevOps in general, I can help with those as well.